There's a term that scientists use for what happens to a driver on a long, familiar road. They call it highway hypnosis. The theory is fairly straightforward. Your brain, having driven this route hundreds of times before, stops bothering to actually look at it. It substitutes memory for observation. It runs on what it already knows is out there, rather than checking. The accepted explanation is that this is perfectly normal. That another part of your mind, some quiet, capable part that you rarely meet, was handling things the whole time, that you were never truly absent. What the accepted explanation tends to skip over is this. If something else was at the wheel, something that knew every turn and every junction, every light, then where exactly were you? And rather more unsettling questions that follow, when you stepped out of the car and you felt the ground underneath your feet and thought, right, I'm home, how certain are you that it brought you back to the right place? Tonight, 4 people try to make sense of a drive that they can't account for. None of them quite manage it. This happened in 2017. She was 26, living in South London and working in an office in the east of the city. The commute was 40 minutes on a good day, down through Camberwell, across the river at London Bridge. She'd done it so many times at that point that she genuinely couldn't have told you what the route looked like anymore. It had become invisible in the way that only truly familiar things can. She left her house at 7:10, the same as every morning. She remembers filling her water bottle in the kitchen sink and thinking she'd need to buy more coffee on the way back. She got into the car. The radio came on automatically. She'd left it on the previous evening, and there was a song she didn't recognise playing from what sounded like the middle of it. She drove. She's very clear on this point. She has full memory of the journey. She remembers a white van cutting her up, remembers sitting in stationary traffic on the Old Kent Road for what felt like 10 minutes, and remembers thinking that the man in the car beside her looked unexpectedly miserable for a Tuesday morning. She remembers all of it the way you remember a journey you actually made. At some point she pulled into a parking space and switched off the engine. She reached for her bag and she opened the door. But she was outside of her own house. Not her office, not anywhere near the river. Her own front door was 6 feet away from her. The number 34 tarnished brass she had been meaning to replace for 2 years. The same street, the same grey terrace, the same wheelie bin, still out for collection day. The radio was still playing. The song had finished and something else had started. She sat back down in the driver's seat, and she thought very carefully about what had just happened. The journey she remembered, the van, the traffic, the miserable man, would have taken her east across the river, not back to where she started. There was no version of that route that ended here. The petrol gauge hadn't moved. The clock said 7:49. 39 minutes had passed and she had not moved. She rang in late to work, told them her car had been slow to start, which was the closest truthful thing that she could think of. She drove the commute again that evening without incident, the same as she had done every other evening that year. She still hasn't mentioned it to anyone she works with. She said she's not sure what she would tell them. That one morning in January, she drove her car for 40 minutes and ended up exactly where she started, with a complete memory of the journey. As best as she can tell, simply didn't happen. He was in his mid-30s, working as a field technician in rural Shropshire. This would have been around 2009. His job took him between small towns and villages, installing and servicing equipment for a telecommunication company, and because the geography out there was spread so thin, he spent a significant portion of his working week simply driving. Long stretches of A-roads, and occasionally a single-track lane, with very little traffic. He'd been doing the job for about 4 years by then. There was one particular road he used almost every day. A straight, flat 2-lane that ran for about 8 miles between 2 small market towns. Open farmland on both sides, a handful of scattered oaks, nothing else. On a clear day, you could see the road ahead of you for almost its entire length. He timed it once, 14 minutes at the speed limit. One morning in the spring, he turned onto it as he always did, somewhere around 10:30. The radio was on. He remembers it being a phone-in program, someone calling about planning permission for a garden wall. He had a flask of coffee on his passenger seat, and there was nothing unusual about the morning, or about him, or the road that he was on. He was fully awake. He's very particular about this. Not drowsy, not zoning out in the passive, comfortable way he sometimes did on long motorway stretches. He was present. He was listening to the radio. He was thinking about the job that he was driving towards. And then, he wasn't thinking about anything at all. There was no moment of transition, no gradual dimming, no sensation of drifting. He was looking at the road ahead, and then the road ahead was slightly different. The same road, the same flat fields, but the light had shifted by the kind of degree that only happens over time. The radio was mid-conversation, and the topic had changed from the garden wall to something about a local council meeting. He reached for his coffee out of habit and found it was cold. He looked at the clock on the dashboard. 16 minutes had passed. He was about 2 miles beyond where he should have been. He recognised a farm gate. He always used as a reference point, and it was behind him now. The car had driven itself for 16 minutes on an open road and delivered him safely to the other side. He pulled over onto the verge and sat there for a while, with the engine idling, trying to locate the gap in his memory and just finding nothing. Not a blurred impression of it, not a vague sense of the road, just an absence, a clean cut between one moment and the next. He was a few minutes late to his job that morning. He made up some excuse about roadworks, and his colleagues didn't ask. He said that the thing that stayed with him wasn't the missing time itself. It was the farm gate being behind him, because he knew that gate. He slowed down near it every time, on the off chance that a tractor was pulling out. He'd done it that morning too. He was almost certain he had. He just had no memory of it. And this happened in the summer of 2003. He was 23, driving back home to his parents in the north of England after a long weekend away, a place that borders near the Scottish coast that a friend had access to for the summer. There were 2 other people in the car, his friends from university in the passenger seat, and his girlfriend at the time in the back. She'd fallen asleep somewhere around Carlisle. The friend was awake, quiet, and watching the road. It was late, probably midnight or just after. The M6 had thinned out considerably by that point, and he was making good time. His parents were expecting him. He'd phoned them from a service station around Penrith and said he'd be home by about 1:30. He remembers a long, gradual bend in the motorway somewhere south of Carlisle, and as they came around it, his friend pointed out to the moon. It was full and enormous, sitting very low on the horizon, in a way that made it look closer than it should have been. It was reflecting clearly off a reservoir to their left, a long, still mirror of it in the water. He remembers thinking it looked like something out of a film. And that's the last thing any of them remember. For all 3 of them, the next moment was just there. The music playing again, the motorway ahead, the dark fields on either side. His girlfriend was awake in the back seat, sitting upright, with no explanation for when she'd woken. His friend said quietly, "Did something happen to you?" They tried to rationalise it in a way you do. A brief power failure had cut the car music and come back on. Except the car didn't have any electrical faults, and a power failure wouldn't have taken their memories along with it. They'd all simultaneously nodded off for a second, except his friend had been wide awake, and still had no account of what the road had looked like for however long had passed. They talked to themselves in circles for a few minutes, and then went quiet, because none of the explanations were working. He looked at the clock. It was 2. He'd phoned his parents from Penrith around 11. Penrith to his parents' house, at that hour with no traffic, was roughly 2 hours. He should have been pulling up outside by now. Instead, He was still 45 minutes away, on a motorway that he'd covered more quickly than on his worst nights. Somewhere in between the reservoir and that moment, over an hour had gone. He pulled into the next service station, and all three of them sat in the car park under the fluorescent lights for a long time, not really talking. His girlfriend checked her phone. His friend stared out the window. He kept trying to put his finger on what the gap had felt like. Not sleep, not a blackout, not even a loss of consciousness. More like being switched off, and then switched back on again, with the car exactly where it should be and everyone exactly where they'd been. He arrived at his parents' house at 3:10. His mother had left the porch light on and gone to bed. It didn't wake her. The three of them have talked about it since, over the years. They've never produced an explanation that holds. The detail his friends bring up, whenever it comes up, is the moon. When the lights came back on and the music started again and the road returned, the moon was in exactly the same position over the reservoir as it had been when they went around the bend. Not risen and not moved, it was exactly where it had been. As though the world hadn't paused at all, as though whatever happened, happened only to them. He was 41, living on the outskirts of York, working at a manufacturing site about 20 miles away. He'd been doing the same drive to and from work for 6 years, M1 to the A46, and then the back roads through a stretch of countryside he'd come to know well enough that he barely noticed it. Total journey time in the evening, once the rush had died down, about 35 minutes. He knew it to within a couple of minutes. One evening in autumn of 2015, he left work at the usual time, around 5:30. He remembers it being one of those flat November days where the light goes before you're ready for it. He was squinting into the low sun on the main road, and then by the time he hit the A46, it was already dusk. He turned the radio on. Nothing memorable about the drive, nothing that stood out. He was on the back roads, probably 4 or 5 miles from home, and he remembers thinking about what was in the fridge and whether he needed to stop. He was not tired. He'd not been working a long shift that day. 6 hours, and it was nothing unusual. He wasn't on any medication, wasn't distracted by a phone call, because this was 2015. He had already developed the habit of putting his phone in the glove box while he drove. But after that, nothing. Not a hazy impression of the remaining miles, not a vague sense of the lanes or the turning for his village. Nothing at all until the moment he became aware of himself again, which was when he was already on his own driveway, with the engine running and the headlights on, both hands still resting on the wheel. He sat there for a moment trying to work out what had just happened. He felt completely alert, not the mild fog of someone who drifted off, not the peculiar disorientation of walking somewhere unexpected. He was simply there, at home, with no memory of the last portion of his journey. He checked the time. It was 8 minutes past 7. The drive should have taken 35 minutes. He left at 5:30. There was an hour and 37 minutes for a 35-minute journey, with no stops, no diversions he could recall, and no route that would account for the difference. The petrol gauge had dropped more than it should have. The car had covered a distance that he couldn't trace. He went inside, he made dinner, and he didn't ring anyone because he didn't know how he'd start the conversation. He didn't sleep especially well that night. When asked what he thought had happened, he said, "The drive home is one I know best, 6 years of it. Every turning, every dip in the road, every place where the hedgerows close in and you have to watch the verge. My hands know it. That's the part that unsettles me. Not the fact that I lost an hour on a road that I don't know, that I lost an hour on a road I know better than any other.